こんばんは。So, welcome to this the public recording for the podcast Voice. Professor Markus Gabriel, welcome to this podcast. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Shoke, the host of this podcast, and it's a great honor to have you as a guest. And the podcast is brought by the Comfort Tree Village project by Musashino University. And first of all, could you briefly explain your philosophy, New Realism, to the audience? I mean, your best-known work is Why the World Does Not Exist. I've long thought that your philosophy could be very helpful to many Japanese people because when it comes to Japan and Germany, the common national character is pursuing mastery through work. On the other hand, the working hours are quite different in Japan. Long working hours with low productivity is a big problem. So, do you know the term company slave?
Yeah.
So it refers to someone whose entire world is their company. For him, the company is the world. So I really hope that you will write a book next about why the company does not exist.
Let's start with the world, right? And then let's destroy the Japanese economy. So that's the next. So New Realism, sound good? Yeah? Okay. So, minasan konbanwa. So, New Realism can be defined by a combination of two claims. And then everything else follows from those two claims, right? They're, as it were, the fundamental equations of the view. So the first claim has many consequences. It sounds much more trivial than it is. We'll get to this. And the second one is more exciting, but also has many consequences. So claim number one, we can know things, reality, as they are in themselves. That means we can really know by perceiving, by thinking, and in many other ways, how things are. There's no gap between the human mind and reality. So a very simple, let me give you just one philosophical thought that shows you why this is important. So imagine that there were a gap between the human mind and reality. So some of you might think that their mind is their brain, right? That the part of you that is doing the thinking and perceiving is here, right? Up here somewhere, right? You don't know exactly where, but somewhere here. So imagine you believe that. And then you would think, right? How do I know that you are here, right? How do I know that I'm sitting next to Shoke Sensei, right? And then the explanation goes something like this. Light bounces off of his body. It hits the nerve ends of my eyes. Then some processes happen. And somewhere in the visual cortex, I have an image of Shoke Sensei, right? In this case, I would be fundamentally separated. My mind would be separated from him. What I see in my brain, however that works, would not be Shoke Sensei, but an image of him, a neural image, for instance, right? So in this sense, in this story, I'm separated from reality. And in a story where my mind is not at all my brain, but something else, and somehow reality has to enter that, material reality, you see that this gets even more complicated. So if your mind is not your brain, but something else, maybe something immaterial, whatever it is, then how can material reality get into that, right? So this is just to give you a flavor of a problem. But if any of this were true, any version of this, then you have the following problem. How can you know that you have a mind? Right? So imagine the brain story is true, right? Well, how do you know about the brain story? Well, someone opened the brain and they checked, right? So, or fMRI or whatever technology, right? Well, but what did they see? Did they see the brain? No, they saw an image of the brain. So what you're actually saying is not that the brain receives images of reality or produces them, but an image of the brain, because how else would you know about the brain? So if you apply the story that you tell, that you're separated from reality, to itself, right? How do you know that this is true? Then you see this can't be true. And so it looks plausible, right? The world's out there, the mind's in here, and the world has to get to the mind by way of causal, photons and nerves, right? Or there's a material reality out there, and the immaterial one in here, right? And then still there's a gap. But how do you know that there's a gap? So if you know that there is such a gap, or if there are two sides of the story, now you look at this from a different perspective, right? Now you see the two things. You see your brain and Shokei Sensei, right? You actually see me from the outside, right? And so in this story, you have changed the perspective, but you don't know what to say about it. So New Realism, first claim, gives up entirely on the idea that we are separated from reality. There's no trace left of the idea of a separation from reality. No trace. And then this has consequences. Let me give you one interesting consequence. This means that the brain cannot produce images of reality. Also, it doesn't. If you open the brain, the skull, there's no image. There are no images in here. There's interesting stuff, right? Cells of different kinds, lots of connections, liquids, right? Electricity, waves. All of this is in here, but not a single image. If you open my brain, you will not see a photo of Shokei Sensei, right? You will see neurons. There's no image in the brain. Now, New Realism will tell you, what if the brain is a receiver? So imagine there's a TV program, right? And we can all watch the same news, but we watch it on different stations. So my TV at home is not your TV at home. We have different stations. But we can watch the same show, the same news. So imagine the brain does not produce images, but is exactly like a TV station. It receives the program that is broadcasted, right? So that's what New Realism would say about the brain. Reality is broadcasted to all of us, but we have different stations. So that's why it looks different to me than it does to you. My TV is slightly different from yours, because brains are never the same. But it's the same show is broadcasted. Now, claim number 2. So claim number 1, reality is not out there. We are not separated from it. There's no interesting philosophical difference between the mind and the not mind. We have to erase that distinction. Second claim, more radical even. The show that is broadcasted, reality, is not a single show. That is what I mean by the world does not exist. There is no overall place where we are, and that place is the object of knowledge. Let me show you how radical the consequence of this is, and then I give you just some arguments for this, right? How to get there. So many people believe right now, that is the contemporary scientific worldview, that the following story is true. 14 billion years ago, the Big Bang happened. I'm not denying this, don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, that's true. So 14 billion years ago, something happened. We call this the Big Bang. Though contemporary physics questions this right now, but it's still an acceptable view in physics, the Big Bang. So there was the Big Bang, let's assume that's correct. And then matter formed, fermions and bosons. So what we call matter today is just fermions and bosons. There happens to be dark matter, and we don't know what that is, and it's 96% of the universe. But let's forget that minor complication and just look at fermions and bosons, right? And then fermions and bosons, right, did lots of things, and they produced molecules, H2O and carbon and the stuff of life. But all of this had to be produced in stars first, right? They produced the material out of which then later life comes. And then much later in this story, you have a planet. And much later in the story, on the planet, this one, you have primitive life. Then you have dinosaurs, fails, erasure, new life. Long story short, we are in Tokyo, in that story. Like one story, Big Bang to Tokyo. However, most of the story that I told you is entirely unknown. So it sounds like, yeah, this is what happened. Every child knows this, right? This is what happened. This is how we got here. But how do you get from physics to planets? We don't know. There's no unified physics for fermions and planets. There's no single discipline, physics, which tells us how planets are related to fermions. Planets are not made out of fermions in the way in which bread is made out of flour. So that's simply not true. All right? Though many people believe that. But more complicated, nobody knows where life came from. Right? So the next problem in the story, that is not at all the object of physics right now. In no way. Because we don't know what we're looking for. So not even the most brilliant physicist, and you have many of them in Japan, can figure this out because they don't know what they're looking for. Now, we don't know what the essence of life is, right? Is it carbon? It's very important for life on planet Earth, right? But it's, like what kind of material? And even if you have material, that's not yet life, right? You can have the material of a human, but the human is dead. So life is not the material, it's something else. We don't know what that is. And even if we figured that out, so we know how planets are really made out of fermions, how life is made out of carbon. So imagine we know the details of this somehow. Then we have no clue what Japan is. Because what is the physics of Japan? Now at the very latest, things become meaningless. Because Japan is not an object of physics. There's great physics in Japan, right? And there's Japanese physics, but there's no physics of Japan. There's physics of the landmass currently occupied by Japan, but there's no physics that explains you why Kishida will not be the prime minister in 2 years, right? Physics doesn't explain why Kishida resigned, right? That's not an object of physics. And nor is the beauty of Japanese mountains or Japanese Buddhism an object of physics or any other natural science. So what I'm saying is all these elements of the big story, the fermions, the temples, the life, the dinosaurs, all of these bits and pieces just don't hang together. That's the second claim. We can know all these things. There really are fermions and bosons. The difference is one has a spin of a half and the other of a spin of one. That's quantum mechanics, right? So we really know this. And there were dinosaurs. We really know this. And there is Japanese Buddhism. You really know this, right? But dinosaurs and Japanese Buddhism don't hang together, right? So that's the view. So we can know reality as it really is, but reality is not a single thing. the world, sekai, doesn't exist. And so if you combine these two claims, reality is real and we can know it, with the claim that it is a bunch of different fragments, I call them fields of sense, for various reasons. If you combine these two views, then you have new realism.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think, there is a big commonality between the philosophy of Shinran, the founder of Jodo Shinshu Temple, so the Tsukiji Honganji also, and so previously we visited the Komyoji as well. So the Shinran and your philosophy are both something about unknown thing, right? So you are familiar with Buddhism, but so you said new to Shinran. So I like to briefly give introduction on Shinran's philosophy. So Shinran, so interestingly, recognized himself as a fool. Because he understood that his perception is always limited compared to the Buddha's perspective, right? Which he could never really know. Shinran emphasized that you can do any bad thing according to the karma or condition you encounter in your life. For example, you might condemn someone on the TV news for committing murder. But Shinran said that if I grew up in the same environment as he had, and if I'm surrounded by the same kind of experience, condition as he had, I might commit the same crime. So, in my interpretation, what he's saying is that since your perception depends on your conditions, you never know the world, and even yourself. In other words, the world does not exist. So, maybe, before coming here, we had a good conversation on how your philosophy is well accepted for some reason in Japan. Maybe because there might be a ground on this land of Japan where the great good ancestors like Shinran spreaded the people's Buddhism philosophy. Because he perceives himself as a fool, it might sound negative, but it actually works as a positive prescription for the people to overcome nihilism. As you said, the word was invented because people were afraid of the unknown.
Yeah.
But in fact, by accepting the limitation of our perception, we can cultivate our open-mindedness to the unlimited potential that lies ahead in the unknown. So, if you have any thoughts on Buddhism and even on Shinran's teachings, could you share something?
With pleasure. So I think this is a very important point, the unknown. I'm currently considering writing a book on precisely the unknown. And so here's, I think, a way of highlighting the importance of that consideration. So while I can know pieces, that doesn't mean that the pieces are part of a given whole. So at every corner of my experience of reality, reality can surprise me. And the idea that, just take an example. This is very clearly a bottle, right? But I haven't seen the bottle from all sides, right? And I haven't tried everything with the bottle. So maybe for some reason, and this is an industrially produced object, so I assume that it works like bottles in the way in which I know them. But then I also know that many objects in Japan, not water bottles typically, but many other objects of everyday consumption are very different from the objects I know. Let me give you an example where this works better, right? Because the water bottle most probably does not have an Japanese extra feature, right? That's probably universal. But a couple of days ago, I was at Tokyo University, and in a room, someone gave me this thing, and it wasn't unclear whether this was something to drink or to eat, right? But it's orange, right? And it wasn't. She explained to me that it was in jelly condition, right? Jelly aggregate, right? And I opened it, and I didn't know, right? Will I be eating orange, right? Or will I be drinking orange juice? And you know exactly what I mean, right? And the answer is, well, it's both, right? You will be eating orange and you will be drinking orange juice. And it will have the exact right temperature for summer, right? So it was the perfect object at that moment. But, everything about this would be a surprise. So I could scan it for all sides, right? Smell it, etc., right? But I didn't know what was around the next corner, right? And it could have been anything. I loved it also. It could have been anything. And now imagine that, most of your actual experience of reality is like this scenario. It's just that in modernity, we produce industrial objects, right, that make it look as if there aren't any surprises. But there are always surprises. That's why we all die, right? So we die because there are like way too many things we do not know of our condition. And so in any moment, if you really think about the moment in which you are, there are all these unknown aspects of the moment. And it is impossible to bring the light of knowledge to all the conditions of the moment. For instance, in this situation right now, many people are in the room, and each of us has a completely different life from every other person in this room. And it is absolutely impossible, right, to know how each of us relates to this current situation, right? We know what this is, right, the recording of a podcast, so this allows us to be together. But if you actually started understanding why each of us is here, you would encounter infinitely many conditions. They just stabilize into a stable situation for the next hour, I hope, right? But we don't even know why. So nobody knows why society minimally functions. So the German poet Heinrich von Kleist once asked this question, right? So if you look at a building, right? So like, how is it possible that this building does not just fall on us, right? How is there stability of this building? And then Heinrich von Kleist gives this nice answer. He says, because every piece of the wall is trying to fall down. Right? So every piece is trying to fall down, but they fall from different angles. And this is how they stabilize each other, right? Everything is trying to fall down, right? Gravity, you would now say, right? But as things fall from a different angle, they meet and stabilize. And that means, again, we cannot know why society works and how it works. So I think Shinran's point, right, is very crucial. And talking about ancestors, right, Shinran is an important ancestor to Japan. I just learned that, a very significant amount of Japanese Buddhist temples, right, are in that department. 10,000, right? That's a significant number. It's a very popular form of Buddhism. And here's another interesting ancestor who said almost the same thing in a similar way. The German philosopher Nikolaus von Kues. He has a beautiful book. So we are now in the 15th century. And the book is called Idiota de Mente, The Idiot About the Mind. And he calls himself an idiot. And his other famous book is called the Docta Ignorantia. It's one of his doctrines, actually. So it's the learning about ignorance. It's the learned ignorance, Docta Ignorantia. And he almost became pope, but then died. So he was a very high-ranking medieval Catholic priest who almost made it to the top of the hierarchy and died. And he's an ancestor from my land. He comes from very close to where I grew up. The city, which, Cusanus is his last name, and that's the place where he was from. And he had exactly this thought, where, the most advanced form of knowing is realizing that you are a fool. Nihongo de fool nan desu ka? What did he say? What's the word?
In Shinran's term, oroka.
Oroka. Interesting. And the word idiot that Nicolaus Cusanus uses means the private person, also in Latin and Greek. So the idea is that the experience of the unknown is the opposite of politics. Famously, politicians need to claim that they know. Right? But we all know that they do not know that, right? And so we just accept politics because someone has to pretend like they know. It makes us comfortable. Someone has to pretend that they know whether the typhoon is coming or not, right? And it was a very interesting experience coming here because, everybody constantly in Germany sends me messages. And everybody thinks they know if the typhoon is coming or not. But you don't know if the typhoon is coming. So there we have a very interesting unknown. We know there's a typhoon, and now we know it hit, Shuko. But will the typhoon come? Well, we don't know.
Yeah, great. So we have many common ancestors, right? So the founding spirit of Musashino University is Buddha Dharma, and it is a reality of this world, which, by the way, does not exist, according to you. But anyway, it is how Buddhists see the world, in which all beings are interconnected, interdependent, and all phenomena continue to emerge and change dynamically. In particular, Japanese Buddhism has always placed great importance on relationship with the dead in order to enlarge our notion of self. The question that we are focusing on, how can we become good ancestors, will take us back to the past and forward to the future. And encourage us to think about how we should live in the present. So, if you don't mind, could you tell us about your own good ancestor? It could be a family member or perhaps an ancient philosopher.
Well, I would say, also thinking about this, I would mention two people. Right, one family related, very straightforward in any sense, ancestry, and another a philosopher. So first, I will mention my father, but the two characters are related in important ways, as I will, I think, say in a moment. So my father was a gardener, and he worked at a graveyard, and he was an anarchist. So he believed in freedom. He thought that the only thing that really mattered was freedom. The only justification of a social structure for a good anarchist like him, right, was that it increases freedom, right? So society's only justification is that it makes us more free, which it does, because thanks to society, we can have this meeting. So thanks to society, we can play tennis. Thanks to society, we can drink water, right, from bottles. So society makes us free. That's its justification. And anything that contributes to the reduction of freedom is therefore bad. That was his anarchism, right? And it is probably related to his practice as a gardener. Because if you think about flowers, right, in their context, and in particular in the context of life and death, right, then you probably realize that life is not subject to a rule. Life creates the rules to which it is subject. There is no rule that governs life. There is no physical equation for life. Life is not mechanical. That's why not even quantum mechanics can study life, as no less a figure than Schrödinger admitted. So the famous quantum physicist. So in short, so there I would say my father is an important ancestor, freedom. And an equally, for me as a philosopher, important ancestor is the German philosopher Schelling. So he lived in the late 18th century until 1854, so deep into the 19th century, and was a major, also highly influential figure of his time. And his work is dedicated precisely to freedom. So his most important book is called The Philosophical Investigation into Human Freedom. Now that book and that thought plays a major role also in Japanese thinking. So Schelling is both also an ancestor to a lot of Japanese philosophy, and they both have common ancestors. It's not, right? So they're different lineages. If we go back in human history, we will find ancestors of both of them, common ancestors. But, one important concept, of course, of Japanese Buddhism is mu, nothingness. And Schelling's most important concept is the non-ground. So he thought that reality, everything in reality is free. So coming back to the Shinran discussion, if you try to give all conditions for this bottle's existence, right? Then you need an infinite series of conditions. And you cannot finish the series. That's an infinite series. But that means that the bottle cannot exist. So you need to stop somewhere, right? Otherwise there's no bottle, nothing, right? And so Schelling thought that where you stop, where the chain ends, there's nothing in particular. It begins in the ground of things is not grounded. That's why he calls it the non-ground. And Nishida translated this term very beautifully into Japanese as muti, as not having a root. Okay, muti. So, the hon character as in nihon, right? So that which does not have a root.
Muti.
Yeah, muti. And that's even better than non-ground. So there I would say the Japanese translation is even better.
So no ground. Mute.
Mote, te it is. Yeah, mote. Yeah, sorry.
ないの無にてはそこ。
はい。Yeah, that's exactly it. Mute. Sorry. Yeah. So wrong reading of the character. So and that's and so like this freedom, right? Which is the freedom of the flower, right? And this is one of the many things that regularly bring me to Japan. Is among other things, the very point of Sakura, right? Isn't, like it has many dimensions that too, but isn't Sakura precisely about mute, right? So you know, the flower stops having a root, right? We learn that reality is not rooted and grounded, but flowing. But it's not just nothing, right? It's not just mu or zetemo mu. It's mute. So ancestry, I think, then for me means, right, realizing that we are, you know, groundlessly grounded in a series. And so just like the flower is groundlessly grounded, we are groundlessly grounded in our ancestors.
Yeah, thank you for illustrating your idea beautifully.